According to the Journal of the American Medical Association, opioid overdoses have cut Americans' life expectancy by an astonishing 2.5 months. This new analysis was released just 1 month after the largest fentanyl bust in New York City's history, which uncovered enough synthetic narcotics to kill 32 million people. The NYPD is now on a hunt to stop those trafficking this lethal drug. But now, a big question has arisen. Could the opioid crisis permeating middle America be making its way to the Big Apple? This wouldn't be the first time a drug epidemic has invaded our great city. With the latest on this development is Pastor Michael Walron, author of the City Limits article that explores this revelation. Pastor, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, when you talk about your concerns about the way the opioid epidemic is being handled versus previous drug epidemics, first of all, what exactly are you talking about?
Well, what is amazing now, I think, when we think of the opioid crisis and we hear the language associated with us, especially from even the president on down to local legislators and politicians of the like, the language now is of empathy and compassion. Versus 30 years ago when crack was, rampant and pervasive in many communities of color, the language is that of scorn and really a criminalization of a disease in many ways. And so I was struck by how now there's this desire to rehabilitate those who are on drugs, to find compassionate mechanisms to bring about healing in the lives of people who are being ravaged. Now, we know that most of the opioid crisis now, as it is spoken of, we find in middle America or suburbs or in rural communities. Whereas 30-odd years ago, we talked about crack and it was predominantly in communities of color. But the language is different. Then it was, how do we seek to end this, not disease, but now how do we end the crime associated with us? And there was this not only criminalization of disease, but it was dehumanizing language used to many people in the communities of color. You heard references like crack babies, welfare queens, super predators. Now it is, these are people too who need to be brought back to places of wholeness. And so it just struck me. It made me think that in some ways in our country, in the midst of all the divisiveness that is present, there's also this racialization of compassion in many ways. And so even now, compassion has a racial component, whereas the face of the opioid crisis is white, the face of the crack epidemic was black, and the language is different, the approach is different, and there was more of a dehumanizing attempt back then than there is now.
Do you have any concern, considering this bust that just happened in Queens, that the opioid epidemic could be coming to New York, specifically to communities of color? Because we're talking about, once again, an inexpensive drug.
Yeah, I think the drug epidemic has been in communities of color for a long time, whether it's opioid. And I think now when you think about Percocet and Oxycontin, that is really a drug of choice for many, especially millennials in many ways. I think we do see a surge in the usage in many communities of color, but the ramifications connected to addictions have still been present in communities of color, have always been present. My concern is that in the midst of trying to bring healing to those who suffer from opioid addiction, that we don't forget the countless number of underserved communities, communities of color, African-American communities, Latino communities, that have been suffering under drug addiction for years, and there hasn't been this same compassionate language and approach to bring about healing. Incarceration and healing are two different languages we speak. Then it was, how do we put them in jail? How do we end the scourge of the drug addict, the crack addict? Now it is, how do we heal these communities and bring wholeness? That is my concern, that in the midst of trying to find ways to bring about healing and wholeness, we don't leave behind those communities that have been dealing with drug addiction for years.
Well, could you then make the argument that there have at least been some steps moving forward, like we've changed some of the drug laws, there's been a strong push to change the marijuana laws specifically in New York State. Things of that nature. Has that helped move the needle at all and made things a little bit more fair? I
mean, when you think of the Fair Sentencing Act of 2010, that was really contrary to the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of '86 that brought in mandatory minimums. Yes, there has been a concerted effort to really reduce the inconsistency in rates of incarceration and sentencing time that we saw as a great disparity, 30 years ago, where you could be caught with 50 grams of crack and get 10 years, and versus it would take 5,000 grams of cocaine to get the same 10-year sentence. So I think there's been an attempt to really take away the disparities with regard to sentencing. I'm just more more focused or thinking about the existential ramifications of people who see themselves dehumanized and demonized because of crack and drug addiction versus those now who are being humanized in the language of rehabilitation. I'm just concerned that these communities of color, in the midst of the widespread desire to bring about rehabilitation, are not forgotten about, that are still dealing with this. You speak of the legalization of marijuana. You know, I hope for the day in many ways, and it's funny hearing a clergy person say this, that it becomes legalized primarily because if you think about the rate of incarceration among African Americans for marijuana possession, and 60% of incarcerations in this state are because of drug or marijuana possession. My fear is that there'll be lobbyists pushing against this because many of our prisons are upstate in rural communities that thrive off of this prison, of the private prison industry. If you reduce drug incarcerations by 60% by legalizing marijuana, in some ways, you disrupt the economies of these communities upstate. And I'm convinced that many elected officials in these communities will be fighting against the legalization because how disruptive it would be to their local economy.
What is it that we've learned from the crack epidemic that we could apply to help make us better stewards of helping people through the opioid epidemic?
You know, during the election, the presidential campaign election, I remember hearing former President Bill Clinton offer an apology for the Clinton crime bill that really led to this mass incarceration on many levels connected to drug addiction in many African-American communities. And there was a part of me that celebrated that, right? But there was the other part of me that wondered, was this because of political expediency? And I think as we look back, we saw the destructive and I think chaotic ramifications that took place because of these attempts to wipe out drugs, but really wipe out communities in some way. You think of the hundreds of thousands of African Americans who went to jail because of minor drug infractions. You think of their futures that were really stunted because now that record is a stain and a scar upon their future possibilities. You think of the countless children who grew up without their parents because of these mandatory minimums and, again, based on minor possession. When you think about that, I hope that as we move forward, we think about the communal impact on communities, especially of color, when we begin to take hard lines instead of healing lines in our communities. I hope we've learned from the devastating impact of how we dealt with those during the crack epidemic so that we begin again to make people whole and begin to humanize people. The language used now is a humanizing language versus 30 years ago was a dehumanizing language. I hope we learn to treat everyone with the same dignity, no matter who they are and where they're from.
That is a wonderful message to leave it on, to humanize everybody. Listen, thank you so much for joining us on the show and talking us through what is an incredibly, I think, difficult and challenging issue.
Absolutely.
Thank you.